Laura, I might just let everyone in now, or are you going to?
I'll let them in now.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. I believe everyone's filing in now to our Connect 4 session, the built environment. I will just give it a few seconds on this slide until we have most people joining. Perfect. We have 3 specialist speakers today on our panel. Peter Murray, OBE, New London Architecture. Peter is co-founder of the NLA. He is Mayor of London Design Advocate, Chairman of the Temple Bar Trust, past Master of the Architects Company, a board member of Be First and the Association of Architectural Organisations. Peter will be presenting on the reasons to be cheerful, including through placemaking and architecture and the direction needed to create sustainable cities. Adam Tyndall, Transport Programme Director at Business London, will be presenting a thought piece earlier this year in response to smarter road user charging by the end of the decade, addressing the triple challenge of air quality, climate and congestion. Fiona Call, Programme Manager at Cross River Partnership, will be launching CRP's latest river freight case study, which sets out learnings, challenges, outcomes and emission savings from London's first multi-drop river freight trial. And we really want to hear from you in the audience, so please introduce yourselves in the chat. If you have any questions, write them in the chat as the presentations are going on. At CRP, we are experts in delivering positive change. We are an impartial delivery organisation supporting private, public and voluntary organisations to address creatively challenges around air quality, transport, placemaking and well-being. Through these Connect 4 sessions, we are seeking to air many views so that stakeholders can decide how to arrive at common ground and implement improvements. Sustainable Steps is CRP's new tool, which cross-cuts all of the 4 topics I mentioned. So we are pleased to announce that this new web page is available to help London small businesses on their sustainability journey. The website offers different suggestions to reduce negative impact on the environment. And we sorted these actions into goals or pledges that the users can commit to addressing. So please take a look and follow the link to make a pledge, including streamlining orders, reducing waste, reducing energy consumption and conserving water. But first, to kick off a session, I'm going to hand over to Peter Murray to be speaking about the impact of sustainable cities and how we can be optimistic. So over to you, Peter. Are you there, Peter? I think you're on mute if you are speaking. Are you able to unmute? Yeah, I can hear you perfectly now.
You can hear me now, sorry.
Yes.
Yes, I'm going to be talking about reasons to be cheerful because there are a number of things which have occurred recently. I've come across things that make me think we're moving in the right direction in a number of areas. And I mean, I start with a slide of this chap who is Jan Gale, Copenhagen planner, one of the probably the most influential people on urban planning today. An endless number of green buildings doesn't make a sustainable city. And I think that that's important because one of the things he also said was it takes 40 years really to create the change that is necessary in delivering a greener city, a city which is easier to move around in, and one that is not dominated by the motor car. And so I look back 40 years, and this is a picture of Richard Rogers, Lord Rogers, architect who sadly died last year. And I organised an exhibition with Richard Rogers called New Architecture, the work of Rogers, Foster and Sterling. And Richard Rogers proposed a pedestrianisation of Trafalgar Square, a Victoria Embankment, and also created this bridge you see on this little river in the exhibition across at Charing Cross. And his part of the exhibition included this image of the north side of Trafalgar Square, which, as you can see here, is totally pedestrianised. So the National Gallery is on the right and Nelson's Column on the left. And this area, of course, today is now pedestrianised. It was a scheme designed by Lord Rochester's friend, Lord Foster, but nevertheless, it was an idea which came out of that exhibition in 1986, which is near enough 40 years ago. And so various things have sort of shifted our view of how we use streets and how we see streets as public spaces now. And this is a scheme that I did in 2004 for the launch of the London Festival of Architecture, where we basically just put grass all over the street at St. John Street, leading down to Smithfield on the left, which traditionally is where cows were driven to market in the up until the 18th century. And you can see in the middle there some longhorn cattle, which were the sort of cattle which would have been driven down the street then. And what was really interesting is that when you change the street surface, people's behaviour totally changes. They use it as a park. People lie out on the grass, they have picnics, and they enjoy it in a very different way than you enjoy a 4-lane roadway. And other areas have also looked at different ways of using the streets, and there are cyclovias which happen in cities across the world. This is the summer streets that in New York, where a whole avenue is closed off, and here we see people cycling, but also lots of other things happen in the street. People can just use it in different ways, have yoga classes, set out their stalls of various kinds, just do, I might say, public-facing activities on a street which is normally jam-packed with traffic. And that gives an idea of how much better our cities could be if we designed our streets in a better way. And this is the High Line in New York, clearly one of the most important interventions that has happened in any city, I think, in the last 20 years or so, where here you can walk for 22 blocks down through New York, this lovely green space, out of the noise and pollution created by all the cars and vehicles, and both walk much in a much pleasanter environment, but also it encourages people to get out and walk more rather than the busy streets below. And so the reason why I'm getting cheerful is that 40 years after Richard Rogers set out his stall in that exhibition, this is Alfred Place, which the NLA, which I run, used to be situated just at the south, that red brick building at the bottom, and this is what Alfred Place looked like when we were there. You go back there today and it's like this, and it really does look like this. Maybe not today, it's a bit dull, but generally it is a very popular space and one of the loveliest little urban parks. I think anywhere really. It's done by LDA Design. It works really well looked after by Camden, and is a great space to be. It's just a huge improvement to the way that people are able to use the street. And that's happening further down the road, Princess Circus, Shaftesbury Avenue. They're on site now to deliver this, which will be, it's just so wonderful to see what are really grotty pieces of city being turned into places that people can enjoy. And I think that's just such a huge improvement that, as I say, it's a reason to be cheerful. And then further down, further south, close to the river, is the Aldwych changes, which are taking place at the moment. Again, this, such a significant part of London, 2 churches, Courtauld Collection, King's College, all that stuff used to be jam-packed full of traffic, and soon will look like this. And I think these changes are, a huge commendation really for business improvement districts, because it's bids which have been driving so many of the changes like this that one's seeing around London at the moment. And there are changes taking place in the City of London. This is a little painting I did back in 2015 after a student was killed, young Chinese student was killed by a left-turning construction vehicle at Bank Junction. And looking at what it could be like, perhaps if one took a different view of this, again, really important central city space with the Royal Exchange, the Mansion House, One Poultry, the Ned, the Bank of England, all looking out onto this space. And it's a nasty traffic junction. And then what is happening today, another reason to be cheerful. In October, the City of London started work on improving that space, making it greener, putting in planting, improving the space for people, improving the relationship between cyclists and pedestrians, and really making it a much nicer place to be. And then the city at the moment needs to get people back into the city, not just for working, but also at weekends. They need to bolster the businesses for hospitality. And I think there are lots of things they can do. And this is a wonderful event they had called Golden Key, which was held a couple of weekends ago. But I think also they need to do something regularly every week to get people in there. And one of the great pieces of urban organization over the recent years, I think, has been Paris's ability to restrain the use of cars in particular areas. And these blue spaces on the screen, they are the respire places, i.e. To breathe, the places where you can breathe, which are where cars are excluded at weekends. And they become really popular and populated places in the city. And I think that actually the City of London should do the same. Every weekend, they can close off this area from Cannon Street to the south, London Wall to the north, St Paul's to the west, Bishopsgate to the east. That whole area, which has very little through traffic, some buses, and I've drawn those on the blue lines, but large areas where actually people can congregate, do things. Things can happen in the street, and it might be yoga classes, but it could be cycle routes, could be people having picnics in the street, all sorts of things which would bring people. They can also go and see the amazing historic legacy in the city, the Wren churches. Next year is the 300th anniversary of the death of Sir Christopher Wren, so there'll be a lot of interest in his architecture. The Guildhall Art Gallery, the Livery Halls, fantastic historical area in the City of London, which they can draw people in to see and enjoy. So by just improving the experience of the street, you make the city much more popular. People like to go to places that are enjoyable to be in. And so I think we're seeing some really good spaces being delivered, but I think also there's the hope that we can actually just look at streets as places where people can enjoy being rather than mere conduits for motor cars. Thank you very much.
I think the slides have gone down, but I'll put them back up. Thank you so much, Peter. Everyone see these slides again, hopefully. Thanks so much, Peter. That was excellent. And yeah, loved all the imagery and different uses of spaces and suggestions. I am now, in the interest of time, going to pass over to Adam Tyndall from Business London, who will talk through Changing Gears, a thought piece from earlier this year. So I'll get to the right slide and hand over to you, Adam.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Rachel. I will click take control. Yes. So I think building on this will build on a number of thoughts from Peter's, albeit with Peter's presentation, albeit with fewer nice images. So apologies for that. But I think the two things that really strike me is that that idea that we have a fixed supply of the asset that is road space, the space between buildings, and we have competing demands on that, and we have choices to make about how we allocate that. And there are, if you go back to the introduction of the congestion charge, which is 20th anniversary coming up, we saw a real decrease in congestion initially, and that has but people sometimes say, well, but central London is hugely congested now, and in many ways it is, but we've done really interesting and impressive things like the pedestrianisation of the north side of Trafalgar Square, like the introduction of more cycle lanes. So that these are all choices that we make about how to use this. And I'm going to focus on those that idea of the sustainability of the spaces in between buildings, to pick up on that initial quote from that Peter used as well, and talk about how we might move forward with road charging in some form in the capital. The background to this is a huge increase in the number of miles driven on the capital's roads, 18% between 2012 and 2020. The average driver loses 140 hours a year to congestion at a cost of over £5 billion to the economy. So there's a real economic imperative for the city and the UK. There's also an imperative for various bits of the public sector. The transition to electric vehicles is set to cost the Treasury about £40 billion a year. That is now going to be partially offset by the announcement last week that EVs would be subject to VED as well, but there's still no replacement for fuel duty in the Treasury's coffers. And within London, the cost of subsidising the bus network is roughly the same as the cost of congestion to the bus network. So these are real costs for public services. We've seen the way in which road traffic did not dip as far as public transport through the pandemic, and the way in which it recovered much more quickly and more strongly. And the difficulties that public transport has had in recovering, which is, I think we're now in a better place, but the finances still aren't what they were, and there's a real risk that as those finances are troubled, the services decline, and as a result, fewer people use them, and we enter this spiral of decline that we really want to avoid if we're going to have any hope of meeting our various environmental targets, but also of having a city that I think works and people want to live in. On the environmental side, transport is responsible for a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions, and 3/4 of that comes from roads. Air quality is well covered, and we're expecting an announcement shortly from City Hall about the possible expansion of the ultra-low emission zone out to the boundary that isn't quite the Greater London Authority boundary. The thinking there being making sure that everybody has the ability to turn back and avoid the cordon, hence the green dotted line on the map on the right that you see there. But I think the smart money is on him pressing ahead with that expansion in response to the 4,000 air quality related deaths that we see each year in the capital. And the work that underpins that expansion or proposed expansion of the ULEZ includes a report that was released in January that set out some new targets, really, including the need for a 27% reduction in car kilometres in the capital by the end of the decade if we're going to hit our net zero targets. That expansion of ULEZ is mentioned. And then this idea of a smart charging system later in the 2020s. And that got us thinking about what that might be. There's been a lot of work done on a pay per mile system, something that tracks exactly where you are and comes up with a bespoke charge. But we thought, rather than just following the long-standing dreams of economists and engineers, let's have a think about what some of the principles are for making progress on this, because it's not something that's been done in any comparable environment at this sort of scale, and ultimately making progress is more important the sort of perfection in the system. So the principles that sort of emerged from that were, not actually being anti-car. We need to focus on disincentivizing the journeys that are unnecessary, the sort of 1 in 3 that can be walked within 25 minutes, or the 2 in 3 that can be cycled within 20 minutes of all car journeys in London. But also working with human behaviour to limit private car ownership, so that the marginal costs of those unnecessary journeys are higher. So think about the moments in people's lives where they change their travel patterns, where they might purchase a private car for the first time, getting a new job, moving house, having children. Sort of some of these big life events, and really focusing on those moments where we know that people buy cars for the first time, and work out how to provide those individuals with alternatives. The sort of second principle was around building on success. So both of the congestion charge, as mentioned, with its 29% reduction in congestion, and the sort of knock-on impacts of that. So the congestion charge zone, as I'm sure people know, is a very small area right in the centre of London, but there was a 10% reduction within inner London as well. So that's roughly within the north-south circular, compared to what was actually a 5% increase over the time period around outer London. But also the other system that we thought a bit about was the Oyster card and subsequent contactless regime on public transport, which has this zonal pricing structure that people sort of instinctively understand, and allows user level discounts, exemptions, and price caps, so that people can have predictability about the costs of their travel, and can recognise different circumstances for different individuals. So the third principle was around recognising the limits of technology. Electric vehicles are great, particularly in terms of addressing air quality. They don't do everything. There are wear from both tyres and brakes that creates particulates, but the tailpipe emissions are obviously the big win for electric vehicles. Climate change, there are still big manufacturing impacts that shouldn't be ignored. But the thing that they really don't do anything to address at all is the third part of what the mayor calls the triple challenge, which is congestion. 2.8 million privately owned electric vehicles have the same congestion impacts as 2.8 million owned petrol or diesel vehicles. So let's not. This is important to get the EV transition right, but it is not a silver bullet for all the problems. And let's recognise that tracking people's movement is a big political hurdle. We've seen this. We've seen this with debates, whatever your views of the issue and the quality of the debate. We've seen this with ID cards. We've seen this whenever proposals around pay per mile schemes come up. People don't like the idea of being tracked, and it's something that campaigners find easy to latch onto. So let's not think that just because we have the technology to do something, we necessarily can. And then the fourth principle around keeping it simple. So we tend to use simplicity for the back-end system as a proxy for simplicity for the user, and sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. But really bearing in mind that what individuals want in terms of simplicity, predictability, is really about what they experience rather than what goes on behind the scenes. And that final point around, we know we can come up with the economic models for this. We can engineer the solutions. None of that has been the challenge. Hasn't been the challenge for a number of years now. The challenge is finding something that is politically viable. So we put all this into the mix and had a bit of a think. And this is merely a proposal. We're not saying it's perfect, but we hope that it helps with the conversation that the mayor is keen to have with the city over the coming years, as a solution that isn't the full whack of pay per mile smart dynamic charging, but is a single integrated zonal system, takes in the congestion charge, the ULEZ, even the London Lorry Control Scheme, the tolls that are coming in on some of the river crossings, and we reckon could raise about the same as the congestion charge does at the moment for TfL, and that would be simply by charging the price of a single bus ticket for using your car in outer London on any given day. In inner London, charging twice the price of a bus ticket, and in central London, keeping the congestion charge pricing as it is. And that adding those two additional zones, concentric circles, as it were, to the mix, could we think make a big difference to how people think about traveling around, and as I say, raise the money to make some of the changes in the wider network. I think this point about personalisation, those to my mind, those could be average costs. I think people want to know what it's going to cost when they set out, but the individual daily cost, my cost could be different to your cost, because perhaps I live in an area with more public transport options and drive a more polluting vehicle, and therefore my costs should be higher than yours, where you don't have those alternatives and you have a clean vehicle. But also, we can take that Oyster card idea and cap costs, so there could be weekly, monthly, annual capping of that costs to ensure that it's affordable and predictable for small businesses and for others who need to get around and don't have those alternatives, and they can factor those into their plans. And I think finally, if this is going to get anywhere, it needs to offer something in return. So we've seen with ULEZ scrappage schemes. I think there needs to be a serious, much more significant scrappage scheme that really aims to drive down personal car ownership. And if you want to be really bold, you could even wrap in reforming parking, but we haven't got time to get into that one. So even if you don't do that, I think if people get rid of their cars, let's give them free use of public transport for a year for them and their family. Because when people try things, find out that they can do it, build new habits, that's when you really have long-term impacts. I think there's also a need in that sort of not being anti-car. There's a need for a citywide car sharing scheme. At the moment, this is quite fragmented. But why isn't TfL, branding cars for Londoners with a roundel and contracting them out as they do with other services, so that individuals don't need to own a car but can reliably pick up a car on the end of their street, drive it, leave it elsewhere in London for someone else. These systems work best at scale, and at the moment that fragmentation is really holding back that rollout. And then driving in London is not just a poor experience because of congestion. There are 45 major road structures operating with interim safety measures at the moment. Anyone here who drives around the city or cycles around the city will be familiar with the potholes. Apparently, they would currently stretch the length of 104 Premier League, or perhaps that should at the moment say World Cup football pitches. So there needs to be a real plan to plough this money back into the network and make sure that those who are driving around feel like they're getting something better for the money that it's costing them. And to finish, again, to pick up on Peter's other theme of optimism, there was a poll last year from the Social Market Foundation which found there was only 17% opposition to a smarter road pricing system in the capital, and London was the only region in the UK where support passed 50%. So, as I say, these are just thoughts at this stage. We're not saying this is a finely tuned and well-modelled solution, but I think the idea is to get people thinking about what there might be that could perhaps be more achievable than going for the full bells and whistles dynamic pay per mile system, and also to try and get a bit of urgency into the debate, because whilst it's good that the mayor has acknowledged the need to move in this direction, by the end of the decade is quite a vague aspiration, and I think the real risk here is missing the opportunity and the Treasury waking up to the lost revenue that they're going to experience as people stop buying petrol and diesel, and swallow that all up, and instead of London being able to use that money within London to build on the success of our transport network as a whole, it just ends up going being sucked back into Whitehall and in effect undoing part of that sort of devolution deal from 25 years ago now. So that's a quick run through. I see that the full document has been dropped in the chat, and look forward to hearing your thoughts.
I think you're on mute, Rachel.
Sorry, I was just saying thanks so much, Adam. And yeah, do take a look at the link Isidora's posted. And if you have any questions, put them in because we will go to Q&A after Fiona. But I will hand over to you, Fiona, to launch our river freight case study.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Fiona Cool. I'm a program manager here at Cross River Partnership. And as Rachel said, I'm really excited to be launching CRP's River Freight pilot case study. So just a little bit of sort of context on this sort of case study. So the pilot was actually delivered as part of CRP's DEFRA funded Clean Air Villages for and Clean Air Logistics for London programs. And essentially what the case study does is it provides a really in-depth overview of how the River Freight pilot was set up and delivered, as well as key learnings and outcomes, including emission savings that we had as an outcome of the pilot too. It also provides really helpful information on how businesses can set up their own River Freight trial and things like key contacts that you would need to make it happen. So I would really advise everyone to go and have a look at it, as it has so much detail that I just cannot cover in 15 minutes or 10 minutes that I have today. So before I go into more detail, I will just let you know a little bit about Clean Air Villages, CRP's Clean Air Logistics for London programme. There we go, if I can get my words out. So as I said, this is a DEFRA funded air quality project that is in collaboration with 12 project partners. CRP were awarded £1 million to deliver the project, which is a year long, ending in June 2023. Essentially, the programme aims to encourage more light freight to be transported into central London by river, and this is supplemented by micro-consolidation and the use of low emission modes to deliver the last mile. This in turn will help both to reduce congestion and pollution across London. So to achieve this, we're doing this through 5 key work streams, which you can see on the screen. So our first work stream is called Pier Adaptations and Facilities, and this focuses on the infrastructural elements that are required to make river freight more viable. It can include upgrading piers to make them more suitable for light freight, but also landside infrastructure such as cargo bike loading bays and sorting facilities to enable sustainable and efficient onward delivery. The second work stream is all about vessel charging and infrastructure, so focusing on vessels themselves. Although we think river freight has a really good potential to be sustainable, we do acknowledge that not all vessels out there on the Thames at the moment are as sustainable as they could be. So this work stream is helping to address that through encouraging things like retrofitting vessels and the development of sustainable vessel charging infrastructure and so on. The third work stream is all about implementing river freight trials themselves, which is obviously what this case study is detailing. It basically is looking at different models in terms of how we can transport goods down the river, looking at the different types of goods, the different sectors, but also different models. And it also includes the last mile element as well that would support river freight. So for example, we are piloting things like walking freight schemes and cargo bike schemes as well as part of this work stream. The fourth work stream, which is all about microhub development and transport analysis, is the fact that we appreciate that it's all well and good getting freight into central London, but if we can develop a network of micro consolidation centres that can be used as part of the logistic operations, that would be really, really helpful. But also this work stream focuses on monitoring and evaluating the outcomes and interventions that we're doing as part of the programme. And then finally, the fifth work stream is all about communication and media, because we want to make sure that everyone gains the learnings and knowledge that we're able to find as part of the programme. And that brings me on really nicely to the case study, because that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with this. So The case study provides details about the pilot, as I've said. So those details are essentially that the river freight trial ran for 6 weeks during July and August 2022. It involved 12 partners and was the first river freight project in London with 2 pickup points. Essentially what we were doing was we were transporting office and janitorial supplies by the river into central London. Office supplies such as paper were loaded onto the vessel at Dartford International Ferry Terminal, and then janitorial supplies, surprise as well, I guess, supplies were loaded on at Woolwich Pier and then transported all the way to Woods Quay, which is located on Victoria Embankment in central London. From here, the goods were then delivered by cargo bike to 20 businesses in the North Bank Business Improvement District. So overall, we did 6 river freight trips and we made 59 cargo bike miles as part of the last mile delivery. So I guess most importantly, what were the impacts? Well, the main finding was that transporting goods by river did indeed have a really positive impact on pollution, congestion, but also efficiency. So firstly, the fact that we were doing this pilot meant that we were able to remove vehicular deliveries into and around central London, which in turn had really positive impacts on congestion. It also had significant impacts on air quality, which we were able to quantify using CRP's in-house emissions calculator tool. What this tool essentially does is it enables us to plug in the original delivery data, so things like the distances that were being travelled as part of the original deliveries, the sorts of vehicles that they were using, and the emissions associated with those vehicles. And then we were able to compare that to the emissions and distances associated with the trial. So the emissions from the river vessel and then also the cargo bike. So what that did is it showed us that the pilot, if it had continued for a year, just a caveat, because we wanted to look at it as a sort of yearly comparison so we can kind of understand an impact on a wider scale, the emission savings of NOx would have been 78%, and the annual emission savings of CO2 were 88%. So I think that's really impressive and highlights the kind of real sustainability element that river freight can provide. And I've actually included a table with the exact volumes of emissions that we saved for NOx, CO2 and particulates on the screen. So that's all in the case study. You can have a look at that if you want to see it in a bit more detail. And then the other really good outcome was that the trial also helped to improve efficiency. It was far quicker to deliver the goods by the boat, and actually on occasions the vessel was even early at Woods Quay. So yeah, things were turning up far quicker than if they had gone by car. However, as with all pilots, we did encounter several learnings and challenges. So I've sort of separated this into 2 sections, setting up the pilot and then what we learnt during the pilot. So if I start with the sort of setup, one of the things that we did find difficult was that we had a really large number of stakeholders. Obviously, that was brilliant because it meant lots of people were involved and really positive about trying to get river freight to work. However, it did mean that things were quite slow in terms of coordinating meetings and sometimes getting things to move forward, just due to the number of people involved and the number of kind of sign-offs and sort of agreements we had to do. Another key learning was also that some businesses weren't able to participate in the pilot due to their existing contractual obligations. So for example, because we were only doing quite a short period of time, it just wasn't able to change their current delivery methods for sort of 6 weeks to actually be involved in the trial due to sort of contracts, etc. And then finally, another challenge that we encountered was that we initially wanted to incorporate waste for the outbound journey. So that would obviously have made it even more sustainable because the vessel would have been going back with goods as well. However, this was essentially a bit too challenging because of the kind of additional requirements and standards. Oh, and then obviously the next one, so not the finally, was the cost of the pilot was quite difficult to understand. Essentially, it could vary quite widely dependent on the vessels used, including things like the size of the vessel and the loading method. And also it was sometimes unclear if there was a charge associated with using any of the piers for loading and unloading. So it was quite hard to understand what this trial would cost. Then if I move on to sort of during the pilot, there were also sort of several challenges and learnings that we experienced. It became increasingly clear that communication was really important to ensure that the trial ran smoothly. For example, even though goods sometimes arrived early, which is obviously great, it did mean that we had to be really on it to make sure that the cargo bike courier was aware, because obviously they were planning to turn up, 10, 20 minutes later, and you couldn't have goods just sort of sat on a pier. Also, another challenge that we experienced was actually a technical fault with the vessel's crane. This meant that goods did have to be manually lifted off the vessel during sort of a 2-week period where the crane was out of action. So that was kind of a bit unfortunate, but hey ho, it still all worked. So despite all these challenges, I think, the pilot was overall a really brilliant success, and you can see several of the testimonials from those involved on the screen. For example, Callum Bruce from Baby Bull Group said that the River Freight pilot was an outstanding opportunity to trial sustainable delivery methods, whilst Alison Gregory from the North Bank bid discussed several of the opportunities that the river presents in terms of supporting the economy and reducing carbon, air pollution and congestion. And then finally, Dan Reeves from London School of Economics said it went very smoothly. So that was brilliant. So yeah, I hope you found that quick snapshot really interesting. And as I said, I would encourage you all to have a look at the case study, as it has so many more details about the pilot. And it's just, really, really in depth, and hopefully will tell you far more than what I've managed to tell you in 10 minutes. So yeah, thank you very much.
Making sure I'm actually unmuting. Thanks so much, Fiona. That was really interesting. And yeah, really good to get your 3 perspectives from speakers. I'm just going to take control and take the slides down because we have about 3 minutes for questions. Good to time, Fiona, that. So stop sharing. Okay, brilliant. I think we've had quite a long one from Chris Sturman. Oh, if all presenters could put your cameras on, that'd be brilliant. Chris asked, I'm not sure if this might be a combination of Adam and Fiona answering, in terms of kind of food and drinks for shops, restaurants, etc. If that can't go via cargo bike and river freight pilot, I guess how will road space be made available for those kind of products?
I mean, I can jump in if you like. I think I've got no interest in sort of closing off the necessary access. So I think actually we know there's a huge need for road use to keep the city moving in all sorts of different ways, and that's true of business deliveries and supplies. It's true of people accessing all sorts of services and employment opportunities and all the rest of it. So it's absolutely not about making that more difficult. If anything, I think that driving down unnecessary journeys and thinking about how we make all of this more efficient should make that easier, should reduce costs for suppliers and businesses, because actually the last thing anyone wants is those suppliers sat in traffic jams, wasting time, causing congestion, creating pollution in the city. I think there are a whole range of other interesting things that can be done in terms of consolidating those deliveries in particular areas around streets, and making sure that if you've got 4 restaurants in a row, could they all use the same supplier of vegetable oil and get it done in one delivery rather than each having 4 deliveries coming along? And there have been some really interesting trials on things like that, and printer supplies and all sorts of things that just being more creative, more collaborative, and trying to drive down the number of unnecessary journeys rather than trying to take vehicles off the road entirely.
I think it's also worth noting that you actually can take some deliveries via things like cargo bikes in terms of food, etc., and even rail, for example. So I know that some fresh fish actually comes by train into central London. So it's more about how you're transporting the goods. I don't think that maybe at the moment not many cargo bikes are sort of suitable. However, it doesn't mean that they can't become suitable and refrigerated, etc., etc. It is happening in some places.
Perfect. Thank you both for those answers. Peter, I just wanted to get your views on kind of incorporating architecture and design and and the Thames across London. And obviously there's been projects like the Illuminated River, but do you see anything in the future, or any nice examples of that?
Sorry, I just missed what the nub of the question was.
Incorporating the Thames and architecture.
The what of architecture? Sorry.
The Thames as in the river in London.
The river, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem.
Yes, I often feel very disappointed actually in the quality of some of the architecture that looks out on the river, because it ought to be one of the most special places that people spend, put quality architecture on the river. And I would say when one takes a trip, from Battersea to Greenwich, there are rather a lot of schemes which one would prefer not to have seen. But to a certain extent, I would say one of the greatest, most elegant contributions to the Thames by modern architects is the Millennium Bridge by Norman Foster, actually, which I think remains sort of not just an architectural highlight, but also something which has helped transform the relationship between the City of London and Southwark, and the sort of movement of people, and I would say a lot of the regeneration of Bankside has been helped by that physical link. I mean, in terms of architecture generally along the river, I think that one of the really interesting changes which has happened in fairly recently is this understanding that we need to both look after our manufacturing and so on better, but also then allying that to using the river means that you have new developments happening, like sort of Morden Wharf. It's quite interesting over on Greenwich Peninsula, where that's a mixed-use development. You have an industrial space co-located with residential. It's on the riverside, and that wharf can then be put back into use and used for both people transport, but also good transport of goods. And it was in the early days when Ken Livingstone was protecting working wharves, everyone thought, well, it's a bit old-fashioned, isn't it? Why do we need all that? But actually, it's really important. And I'm, as you said in my introduction, I'm on the board at Be First, which is Barking and Dagenham's regeneration delivery vehicle. And I think the city markets going there, Smithfield and Billingsgate, is going to make a huge difference, because that is nicely placed on the river, and you get a huge amount of stuff which at the moment goes by road could actually come into the city by river.
Perfect, thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you, all speakers. We've got a couple of questions about the River Freight pilot, but all the information can be found in the case study, and I know Isadora's already followed up with one of them. But things like cost, and yeah, that's all covered there. So if you want to take a look, we have linked that in there. And I believe Isadora will share the link to our next session, which is about clean air freight, another one of our programmes, and the challenges and solutions we've uncovered with that project. But thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to our 3 excellent speakers. And we will follow up with materials tomorrow. But yeah, have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.